I got a lot of my precision in my left hand. His precision is in his right hand. And we've learned so much from each other. But it's hard being in a band with him.
Kirk Hammett is the lead guitarist of Metallica, one of the greatest heavy metal bands in the world. But for over 40 years, standing alongside names like James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, he has remained almost invisible. While Hetfield screams of rebellion and Ulrich pounds the drums like a general in battle, Kirk retreats into the shadows, leaving the spotlight behind and letting his guitar speak for him. No scandalous love affairs, no violent addictions, no shocking statements. In a world where many rockers thrive on chaos, Kirk chooses to exist like a ghost, obsessed with horror films, collecting monsters, and playing solos that sound as if they were written from pain he's never spoken aloud. But is that a choice or fate? What turned a lonely, mixed-race kid from San Francisco into the emotional heartbeat of a metal empire? And why, after thousands of shows and millions of records, does Kirk Hammett still feel like a stranger within the very band he's dedicated his life to? Subscribe to our channel and join us as we explore the story of Kirk Hammett, a silent soul, a quiet survivor among colossal egos, and an artist who never asked to be remembered, yet somehow is impossible to forget. Early life. Kirk Lee Hammett was born on November 18, 1962, in San Francisco, California, into a modest working-class family, where the sighs of exhaustion still lingered around the dinner table after long shifts. His father, Dennis Hammett, was a merchant mariner of Irish, Scottish, English, and German descent. His mother, Teofila Chefila Oyao, was a Filipino woman who worked as a waitress, a laundress, any job that paid by the hour. In their small house in El Sobrante, a rough suburb north of San Francisco, being multiracial wasn't a point of pride. For Kirk, it was an invisible burden. Even as a child, Kirk understood what it meant to not truly belong anywhere. He was too Asian to be seen as a white American kid, but too American to fit in with the Filipino immigrant community. His light brown skin, unruly curly hair, and eyes that were both wide-eyed and distant left his peers confused, and so they chose the simplest path: exclusion. Kirk was bullied, ridiculed, and drifted into a world with no name. He wasn't good at sports, he wasn't heard, he wasn't asked, he had no voice in the classroom. But inside this quiet boy was a blazing imagination, fueled by old monster movies and tattered horror magazines filled with images of Frankenstein, Dracula, and misunderstood creatures. It was the only place he felt unjudged. One day when he was 5, Kirk got into a fight with his sister and injured his hand. To soothe him, his parents turned on the TV, and he watched The Day of the Triffids, a bizarre science fiction film. In that very moment, a door opened. A door to the world of the discarded, the deformed, the souls hidden inside monsters. He began spending all his pocket money collecting horror magazines, figurines, and monster models, as if with each piece he gathered, he reclaimed a part of himself. His love for music came later, but it ran just as deep. His older brother Rick, the only family member Kirk truly felt close to, owned a cassette collection filled with Jimi Hendrix, UFO, Led Zeppelin. Every time a riff blared from Rick's room, Kirk was spellbound. He sold some of his horror magazines to buy albums. Then he sold his toys to buy his first guitar, a cheap Montgomery Ward SG paired with a Sears amp that hissed more than it played. But Kirk didn't care. The moment he laid his fingers on the strings, he knew he had found what he'd been searching for all those years: a private language, one that allowed him to speak without ever opening his mouth. From that point on, music became his only bridge to a world he had never felt part of. While other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or policemen, Kirk dreamed of being a ghost, someone who didn't need to be seen, only to exist. Quiet, elusive, but ever watchful. And within that world of monsters, horror films, and electric riffs, a lonely genius was quietly forming, unnoticed by anyone. Early career. As he entered his teenage years, Kirk Hammett was no longer the bullied kid hiding behind monster posters. Now he was a skinny young man with messy long hair, clinging to his guitar as if afraid it might disappear. While his peers dreamed of college or stable careers, Kirk had only one goal: to play music so well, so undeniably well, that no one could ignore him. In 1979, at just 16, he formed a thrash metal band called Exodus with Paul Bailoff, Tom Hunting, and Jeff Andrews, the name inspired by Leon Uris's novel Exodus. It wasn't a big band, and during Kirk's time, they never released an official album. But this was where he learned everything: how to stand on stage, how to scream through a guitar amid a sweaty beer-soaked crowd, and, most importantly, how to hold on to emotion in the middle of chaos. Around the same time, Kirk sought out a very particular teacher, Joe Satriani, the legendary guitarist living in Berkeley. With Satriani, Kirk didn't just study technique. He learned to shape tone, control bends, legatos, vibratos, and even the silence between two notes. It was when Kirk stopped playing fast to impress and started playing deep to reach something no teacher could define: feeling. While Kirk was sharpening every finger in cramped rehearsal rooms across the Bay Area, down in Southern California, another band was running into trouble. That band was Metallica, a group of rebellious kids preparing to record their debut album, Kill 'Em All, but internal tensions were rising. Their lead guitarist, Dave Mustaine, talented but volatile, alcoholic and confrontational, was becoming unbearable for the rest of the band. On April 1st, 1983, as Kirk was rehearsing with Exodus, the phone rang. On the other end was Lars Ulrich, Metallica's drummer. No audition, no band meeting, just a cold invitation. "Fly to New York now. We're recording the first album." Kirk didn't ask questions. Though he had unfinished plans with Exodus, he understood. Opportunity doesn't knock twice. 10 days later, on April 11th, 1983, Kirk walked into the studio, just as Dave Mustaine was being fired, though Mustaine didn't know it yet. That silent coup would become one of the most pivotal moments in modern rock history. No speech, no announcement. Kirk simply plugged in, adjusted the tuning, and played the first riff to "Hit the Lights." The guitar tone was sharp and cold, like a knife, and Metallica instantly knew they had found what they were missing. Few realized that when Kirk played those first solo notes, Mustaine was still on the tour bus, angry, drunk, and unaware he'd been replaced. And Kirk, the man stepping into his place, showed no trace of pride. He entered like a ghost. And then the music spoke. That was the moment history turned. Not with a drum beat, not with a scream, but with a guitar, silent yet unforgettable. Breakthrough and success. When Kirk Hammett joined Metallica in April 1983, he stepped into a machine just beginning to rumble to life, heavy, aggressive, and still undefined. What stood out most was this: he didn't try to control it, nor did he want to lead it. Kirk simply plugged in, bowed his head, and played his first notes as if he had always been there, as if that machine had been built to carry his sound all along. With Kill 'Em All, Kirk wasn't the one who laid the foundation, but he was the one who helped the band take flight. His early solos in Hit the Lights, Seek and Destroy, and Whiplash didn't just showcase technique. They made a statement. Metallica didn't need a replacement for Dave Mustaine. They needed something entirely different. And Kirk was that difference. The real turning point came with Ride the Lightning, 1984, where Kirk began contributing more deeply to songwriting. The opening riff in Creeping Death, originally carried over from his time in Exodus, not only survived the lineup change, but became one of the most iconic riffs in metal history. As the album unfolded, it became clear. Kirk wasn't just a shredder, he was a storyteller through his guitar. In 1986, Master of Puppets was released, bringing with it the first complete definition of the Metallica sound. Within the album's cold, calculated fury, Kirk's playing was the only thing that retained something human. He didn't resist the rage, He merged with it, but with softer curves, aching bends, and legato lines that pulled back just before the breaking point. In Welcome Home, Sanitarium, his guitar seemed to breathe, to speak for those who could no longer scream. But even at the peak, the darkness crept in. In September 1986, during a European tour, Metallica's tour bus skidded off the road. Cliff Burton, the brilliant bassist whom Kirk considered the band's musical soul, was crushed beneath the wreckage and died instantly. The strangest part? That night, Kirk and Cliff had drawn cards to decide who'd get the preferred bunk. Kirk won, but gave it up. That bunk became Cliff's deathbed. And from that moment on, Kirk's music changed forever. No one saw him cry. No one heard him speak at the funeral. But if you listen closely to tracks like The Thing That Should Not Be or To Live Is to Die, Kirk's guitar is no longer just part of the song. It becomes a whisper from the one left behind, carrying the memory of the one who's gone. In 1991, Metallica, the Black Album, became a global phenomenon. And it was Kirk who crafted the strange, chugging riff that opens Enter Sandman, a palm-muted rhythm that bursts into nightmare. A song that made the whole world headbang but also kept children up at night. It was the moment Metallica's music reached the masses. And though Kirk made no bold proclamations, it was his riff that left the first mark in the listener's mind. Yet the higher the glory, the greater the distance. After the Black Album, Kirk's creative role slowly faded. In Load, 1996, and Reload, 1997, he still played, still delivered gorgeous solos, but the studio was no longer a space for collaboration. It became a room for decisions, and the decisions always came from James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. Kirk never pushed back, but over time that silence became the excuse for pushing him further to the sidelines. In 2014, a quiet tragedy struck. Kirk lost the iPhone that held over 250 riff ideas, musical fragments he had nurtured for years, which he called his treasure chest for the next album. The phone was never recovered. And when Metallica entered the studio to record Hardwired to Self-Destruct, 2016, Kirk had nothing left to offer. Not a single riff of his appears on the album. His name is absent from the songwriting credits. For the first time in his career, Kirk Hammett was completely and coldly excluded from the creative process. When asked, he simply gave a sad smile. "I don't like to argue. I just want to play guitar." That line, seemingly calm, was in truth a quiet surrender. In a band where every scream was heard, Kirk was the one only allowed to stay silent. But perhaps it was that very silence that drove him to pour everything unsaid into his solos, where he still had a voice. And maybe, in that quiet, Kirk Hammett was never truly absent. He was simply speaking in another language, the language of a survivor, of a heart never heard, but always keeping time for a roaring machine. Controversies and shadows. In Metallica's history, Kirk Hammett's name has never been tied to scandal. But he has been at the center of a strange paradox, forgotten in silence, pushed aside without anyone needing to push. His gradual fade wasn't caused by failure or misconduct, but by his own unwillingness to compete, a beautiful trait, yet often cruel in a world of oversized egos. Fans may not have noticed, but those in the industry remember one thing well. Kirk was once banned from playing solos. It happened during Saint Anger, 2003, an album that stirred fierce controversy. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich decided to strip away all traditional elements, including guitar solos. For any lead guitarist, that's akin to being stripped of their voice. But Kirk didn't protest, didn't threaten to quit, didn't write an open letter. He simply disappeared from the very music that should have borne his mark. When fans realized this, backlash erupted. Kirk's solos are the soul of Metallica. How could they cut them without asking him? But Metallica gave no explanation. And Kirk, as always, played his role, the one who nods last. Another story, often retold as both sad and absurd, involves Kirk losing an entire Porsche simply because he didn't believe in his own band. After the Black Album was released in 1991, Kirk made a bet with the tour manager. The album would never sell 10 million copies. If he lost, he'd hand over his early model 911 Carrera 4. The result, the album not only went diamond, it shattered expectations. Kirk kept his word and gave up the car. To him, it was just a bet. But to outsiders, it symbolized his growing retreat. A man no longer confident in the very force he helped build. Then another question arose. Why hadn't Kirk ever released a solo album? His peers, Mustaine, Slash, Zakk Wylde, had all launched side projects. Kirk hadn't. For over 3 decades, he released almost nothing under his own name, despite having the skill, the emotion, and a vault of unique musical ideas. The answer was never said aloud, but everyone understood. He had been too loyal to Metallica, even when the band no longer kept him at its center. It wasn't until 2022, with the release of Portals, an instrumental cinematic EP far from Metallica's sound, that people finally heard Kirk speak through his own music. And at a personal Monster memorabilia exhibit, when asked why he stayed with a band that seemed to make less and less room for him, Kirk simply smiled and said, "I don't need people to listen to me talk. I need to play." A short sentence, no bitterness, but enough to reveal the cracks. There are battles without gunfire, breakups that are never declared, and some artists, like Kirk Hammett, aren't pushed out by force but worn down by long, quiet neglect. He never quit the band, never abandoned his passion, but he was no longer heard behind closed doors, and in the unforgiving world of metal, that may be the saddest fate of all, to be cast out of the very thing you helped create, without anyone believing it was ever wrong. Personal life. If there's one battlefield Kirk Hammett has never fought on, it's his private life. No confessions, no talk shows, no tabloid photo ops. But behind the lights, behind the guitar, behind every bowed head and quiet pause, lies a strange and fragile world that few are allowed into, a world full of monsters, fog, and nameless loneliness. Kirk has been married twice. His first wife, Rebecca, married him in 1987, right when Metallica was exploding globally after Master of Puppets. They divorced just 3 years later. No children, no scandals, not a single public explanation. It was a time when Kirk was touring endlessly, emotionally exhausted, and beginning to withdraw inward. His second partner, Lani, entered his life in the kind of silence Kirk was used to. They began dating in 1996 and married in early 1998. Lani wasn't from the entertainment industry. She avoided the media, never appeared with her husband at award shows, gave no interviews, and left no public trail. But it was precisely that quietness that made Kirk feel safe. They had 2 sons together, Angel Ray Kiala and Vincenzo Kiala, names that sound like something out of a fairy tale, tinged with melancholy, much like the wordless compositions Kirk often creates in the shadows. Family was once what Kirk called the only true peace. They lived in Sonoma, California, land of wine and mist, and spent part of their time in Hawaii, where he found the ocean, trees, and a rare silence amidst a life filled with too much noise. No paparazzi, no social media, no one caring that a legendary guitarist was sitting in his backyard reading ghost stories. But peace, for Kirk, like everything else, was only temporary. After 2020, people began seeing him alone more often. No more mention of Lani, no more family photos during tours, and in 2022, they quietly divorced. No official announcement, no statement from either side. But for those who had followed Kirk long enough, the absence spoke louder than any words. He had lost something, and knew it would never return. The one thing that never left Kirk was what had always stayed: his obsession with horror. He doesn't just like scary movies, he lives with them. His monster collection is considered one of the largest private archives in the world. Wax figures, film posters, rubber masks, artificial skulls. From Frankenstein to Nosferatu, from creatures of 1930s black and white films to modern nightmares, they all reside in Kirk's home. And instead of hiding them away like shameful curiosities, he displays them proudly, organizing the It's Alive exhibition, writing the book Too Much Horror Business, and founding the horror film festival Fear Fest Evil. But the truth is, he doesn't love fear itself. It's just that fear is the one thing that never betrayed him. It doesn't change. It doesn't leave. It stays, like an ugly but loyal friend. Once, at his exhibition, he joked, "If I weren't playing guitar, I'd open a monster museum. The only difference is, I do both." When Metallica celebrates victory, when his bandmates bask in the spotlight, Kirk retreats to the hotel, rewatches an old black and white horror film, sketches out some bizarre creature, or quietly rehearses a solo no one asked for. In a world where people live to be seen, Kirk lives to remain unseen. No need to speak, no need to prove, just the need to be himself, in the dark, among monsters, with a guitar that never leaves his hands. To many, it's an eccentric lifestyle. To Kirk, it's the only way to keep himself from disappearing. Legacy and influence. In the world of metal, where speed, screams, and sheer power are often hailed as the ultimate measures of greatness, Kirk Hammett chose a different path. Never flashy, never fighting to stand center stage, yet always the one who gave Metallica's music its depth, its pain, and its soul. He didn't chart the band's direction, but he was the one who kept its heart from losing rhythm. Imagine Fade to Black without that desperate solo, or the Unforgiven without the mournful cry of the wah-wah pedal, like an apology that could never be spoken. In a band where drums and vocals usually claim the spotlight, it's Kirk's guitar that touches the most vulnerable corners of the listener's heart. He didn't write lyrics, but his solos left people in silence more than any words ever could. Tracks like Creeping Death, The Thing That Should Not Be, One, The Unforgiven 2, all bear the mark of Kirk Hammett, not through sheer speed, but through emotion. His solos don't race. They pull back, like a breath caught in the throat. His use of the wah-wah pedal isn't about flash. It's a voice for things that even Hetfield and Ulrich couldn't express aloud. From the 1990s onward, Kirk has influenced hundreds of young guitarists, from prominent names like Matt Heafy, Trivium, Sinister Gates, Avenged Sevenfold, Mick Thompson, Slipknot, to countless underground musicians who see him as a silent icon. He's rarely the first name mentioned when talking about guitar heroes, yet nearly every player carries a bit of Kirk Hammett in their sound. The way he plays as if writing a diary, speaking to the past, or screaming without ever needing to raise his voice. Kirk Hammett's legacy doesn't lie in technique. It doesn't lie in what rank he holds on any greatest guitarist list. It lies in the fact that, even as he was quietly pushed to the background within his own band, he never lost the one thing that mattered most, a soul that listens to pain. He helped Metallica become the first band to perform on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. He's played over 2,000 shows with them, across more than 65 countries. He's an essential member of the lineup inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009 and recipient of the Polar Music Prize, often referred to as the Nobel Prize of Music, for its cross-generational influence. And for anyone who still sees Kirk as just the backup guitarist, consider the list published by Rolling Stone, where he ranked number 11 among the 100 greatest guitarists of all time. Not because of media hype, not because of drama, but simply because of his guitar and the quiet resolve he has carried for decades. The cruel irony, however, is this. While the world honors him with accolades, within his own band, the space he occupies seems to shrink, as if everyone out there is listening, except those closest to him. And maybe that's why, though Kirk has never stood at the center of the stage and never demanded anything, fans still wait for him to step forward, not to give a speech, not to claim the spotlight, but simply to do what he has always done for over 40 years, bow his head to the guitar, and let a solo say all the things no one ever thought to ask. Current life. At 62, Kirk Hammett isn't living like a retired legend. He hasn't stepped away from the stage, hasn't retreated into the golden memories of the Black Album, and certainly doesn't live off past glory like many guitarists of his generation. On the contrary, in 2025, Kirk Hammett has suddenly become busier than ever. In March 2025, he released the collection, Kirk Hammett, an art book showcasing his decades-long curation of vintage guitars and music memorabilia, from the legendary Greenie to priceless vintage Les Pauls. But instead of simply showing off his gear, Kirk turned it into a touring event called The Collection, Live, an exclusive series that ran from April to June 2025 in major cities like Nashville, Philadelphia, Tampa, and Denver. There, audiences didn't just hear about guitars. They heard life stories, quiet struggles, and the loneliness behind the spotlight of 40 years. But he didn't stop at nostalgic storytelling. Kirk surprised fans by announcing plans for his first solo album with vocals, unlike his purely instrumental EP Portals released in 2022. He revealed he had exactly 767 riffs saved up, an astonishing number, and was still deciding whether to use them for Metallica or for a personal project. The upcoming solo record promises a fusion of classic rock, classical, and funk, with a vocal side of Kirk never heard before. Outside of music, Kirk has found balance in a lifestyle that's very Hawaii. He shared that his mornings start with surfing off the coast of Oahu, followed by cooking, reading, and playing guitar. No deadlines, no pressure. "I wake up in paradise and there's no rush," he told Metal Hammer. In a world of artists chasing speed and addicted to the spotlight, Kirk Hammett chooses to slow down. But that doesn't mean he's stopping. As for Metallica, Kirk confirmed the band is brainstorming ideas for their next album following 72 seasons, possibly revisiting the controversial textures of Load, Reload. If that happens, Hammett, who has had his creativity stifled for years, might become the album's most explosive force. "I still feel like I'm climbing," he said. A simple sentence, but it carries a lifetime of never putting the guitar down. He doesn't need to prove he's still young. Kirk Hammett simply remains himself, playing like breathing, composing like instinct, and living as if time had never moved. No one knows when Metallica's next album will come. No one knows what his solo record will sound like. But one thing is certain: Kirk is still playing, and this time he's playing for himself. Kirk Hammett isn't the one who causes the explosions. He's the echo that lingers after all the screaming stops. In a band where everyone fights to assert their identity, he chooses to step back, not out of fear, but because he understands the value of silence. 40 years in the same band, over 2,000 shows, millions of miles traveled, and yet Kirk has never left, never exploded, and never disappeared. He lives the way he plays guitar, fluid, unassuming, and always leaving behind something slightly off balance in the listener's heart. It might be a sense of longing. It might be a softness amid chaos, or maybe just a sustained note, like a question left unanswered. And perhaps, if one were to define Kirk Hammett, it wouldn't be the guitarist of Metallica. It would be the only one in that world who has managed to keep a piece of his soul intact, not torn apart by fame, conflict, or time. If you've ever heard a Kirk solo that made you stop, as if someone had just spoken the feelings you couldn't express, share it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Rock Discovery to keep discovering artists who may not shout, but have never gone silent.